So I was playing baseball in college. I was a freshman at Jacksonville University, and I had an elbow injury that led me into the hospital to get surgery on it. In the baseball world, the surgery is called Tommy John surgery. And I went in for this pre-operation meeting where they were just giving me all of the rundown on how the surgery was going to work and asking me questions on if I'm able to get operated. So one of the questions was, are you allergic to anything? And that question kind of stood out to me because I didn't know the answer. And I was a little bit like scared, I guess you could say, on the inside because I was worried, I don't know the answer. What if I am allergic to something? So anyways, the next day I'm headed in for my surgery and the doctor gives me the rundown on how it's going to work. And he says, okay, we're going to put the anesthesia through your IV and then we're going to wheel you into the operating table. And by the time you get into the operating table, you should be under the anesthesia and unconscious and you shouldn't feel anything. So that he does that. They put the anesthesia in my IV and they wheel me into the operating room. But when I got there, I wasn't unconscious. I was still fully awake. And I'm looking around the room in like a with my eyes closed, kind of looking through because I thought the anesthesia was going to hit me, and I didn't say anything because I figured it was just it hadn't hit me yet, I guess. So the doctors are all confirming with one another that they're ready to cut into me, and as they inch closer with their scalpel, I was just transferred into this above place where I watched from above as my body turned like a bruise like purple and then a like a lifeless blue and then just white like a dead man. And I watched as my heart went flat. I watched my own flatline. And immediately when that happened, I was transferred into this panoramic life review that was like 360 degrees. And the cool thing about it, or the interesting thing as I look back on it, was it wasn't just like a movie. It was as if I was watching it, but I was also experiencing the life review. So what I mean by that is there would be memories that would flash in this life review where I was seeing them, but I was also experiencing them again. And when I was experiencing them, I was also experiencing them from the perspective of every party involved. So I watched my life review. It felt like it lasted a lifetime. And I got to see every single moment of my life flash before my eyes, and I got to see ways in which I did right and ways in which I did wrong and things that I probably should have done that I didn't. And I also got to see the other side of behaviors of things that I never understood. So what I mean by that is there was a time where when I was a kid, my dad would discipline my brother and I. My brother's he's 4 years older. He would discipline us with a belt. And as a kid, I never obviously I hated that, but I always held hatred towards my dad for that my entire life. But in this life review, I could experience that experience from the perspective of my dad. And I got to learn that he wasn't doing that with, to punish us, to hurt us. He was trying to teach us what he believed discipline to be. And whether I agreed with it or not, it was his best and it was coming from a genuine place. So, anyways, at the end of my life review, there was one last memory that flashed before my eyes, and it was this profound game of basketball that I played with my stepdad. His name was Mike. And when my parents divorced, they divorced when I was 8 years old. My mom met Mike, and Mike just became almost a glue to our family. So he was a very important father figure to me. And there was this one time where I was 12 years old where we played this beautiful game of basketball and it was just this loving competition where it was a back and forth and it was just magnificent. And anyways, I got to experience this again in my life review. So it was a good way to end my life review. And after my life review ended, I couldn't help but in my last conscious moments have these thoughts that I just wasn't ready to die. I felt afraid and I felt upset with myself about the not the mistakes that I made, but the chances and the opportunities that I didn't take. Or and what I mean by that is like if I had an opportunity to say I loved you to a family member, I may have missed that. And anyways, in this last moment of my life, I just felt this abnormally strong fear of whatever was next. And sorry, sometimes it gets me a little bit emotional talking about it. So anyways, in my last moment, I felt this fear, and my life review then ended, and I was seamlessly transitioned into this beautiful place that was just magnificent. It was refracted combinations of every color in the rainbow, and it was like this crystally. You couldn't really make out details, but it was just this beautiful place, and there was no physical body. I had no physical body, and I had no conscious mind anymore. You know, the mind that was afraid of whatever was next, it was completely gone. I was just pure unconditional love. And I see this strange figure appear in the distance, and immediately, as soon as I see it, it's upon me. It's very close to me, and it just throws me a basketball. And it was Mike, and we were recreating that beautiful memory that I just saw in my life review. And we played this basketball game for what felt like an eternity. And as the game ended, he slowly backed away from me and his tone changed. You know, during the game we didn't have physical bodies, and so I don't know, it's hard to describe, but our communication was telepathic. The entire game of basketball was telepathic. So anyways, he backs away from me and then telepathically his tone changes and he communicates essentially, okay, playtime's over. I've been sent here for a reason. And that reason is to offer you a second chance because I know how not ready to die you were after your life review. And he said, you can stay here with me if you want. I'll give you the choice. You can stay here with me, or you can go back down to earth. But if you choose to go back down to earth, you have a responsibility to live out what he referred to as a great purpose. So it didn't really feel like I had much of a choice, and I knew what I had to do. So then Mike disappeared, and I was then face to face with myself on the operating table with what felt like a glass panel separating the two. And I saw the doctors as they injected me with the shot that saved my life, and then I woke up on the table and I was punching the doctors. I was trying to go back to this beautiful place, and life was never the same after that.
Goodness, I can imagine. I mean, it must have been so difficult to reconcile that experience, right? Because you mentioned being in college, so you must have been quite young when you had this experience. Did you know anything about NDEs, and what did you make of, this whole thing that happened to you? What did you think it was?
Yeah, so when I had the experience, I was 19, and it was very, very challenging to make sense of it, especially at first. I think for the first maybe 2 years after the experience, it was always in the back of my mind, but I tried my best to not pay any attention to it excuse me, um, because it was just the reality of the situation was too much for me to bear. It was it was as if I was living a life that wasn't mine for the first 19 years of my life, and I think I knew on a subconscious level if I were to accept that I was alive in this other place and that this other place was real, then I would have to change who I was down here on earth to align with my newfound spiritual beliefs or faith system, whatever you want to call it. So yeah, I didn't give it any mind for the first 2 years, and then slowly over time it started to become real for me. And as that happened, I began to evolve into alignment with my newfound faith.
And how has that process been like for you of figuring out what your purpose is? And I mean, I can only, speak for myself. When I was 19 years old, I was probably just thinking about parties and going out and, I don't know, probably shopping or something like that. What was the process like of starting, not being able to forget this experience that was very meaningful and trying to change your life path to reflect the things that you have learned during this experience?
That's a really good question, and it's been very hard, very, very hard because eventually I did get that surgery that I was scheduled for, and eventually I did make a return to baseball. But when I did, it just felt like something was missing. The love for the game was missing, and my entire life there was only one thing I wanted to be, and that was a professional baseball player. And before my experience, I was on track to do that. And then this happens and this becomes after those 2 years pretty much all that I can think about. So when I did come back to play baseball, my I just wasn't in it and I wasn't very good and I had to let go of that. And it felt like there was this symbolic alignment of this near death experience and this internal death that was happening at the same time. And it was just so confusing for a really, really, really long time for me and still is at times. I'm 5 years out from that experience, but it was just really, really confusing to try and figure out where the confusion was coming from. Was it because I had just lost my identity as a baseball player, or was it because I was trying to make sense of this profound experience, or was it the pandemic? Because it was during the pandemic, and it was just this jumble of what is going on. But it taught me a lot for sure. It did, and it strengthened me deeply.
So, where are you now in terms of figuring out what you want to do? And, you've mentioned in your life review, you've seen the things that you maybe didn't do so well previously that you wanted to address and you wanted to live life differently if you were to come back. Um, where are you now with the lessons that you learned back then, and what has changed from 19 you?
That's a really good question too. So I'll start with where am I now? Right now, I am currently writing a book about the experience and all the lessons it's taught me. And I feel like that's a part of the purpose that I was sent back is to share the message of what I like to call becoming ready to die because of that feeling that I had after my life review where I just wasn't ready to die. It was kind of this indescribable anger with myself and regret. And it was just like, I would never ever want anyone else to have to feel that. So that's essentially what the mission of quote becoming ready to die is about. I forgot the second part of your question.
Good one. I was so into it that I think I forgot as well, but let me try to go back to a train of thought. So, where are you now compared to where you were? And I think you answered that, and then the lessons that you. Yeah, I think the second part you've answered it as well, right? About the lessons that you took from it and the way that it's changing your life. So, if I understood correctly, then it's about sharing the message of becoming ready to die.
Right. Yeah. And if you want, I can talk a little bit about what that means. Like,
I
um,
would love that, yes. Because
yeah,
I think it's such a new concept, becoming ready to die, and we tend to think of it in a maybe a physical way of when your body is old or when you have a crippling disease. But what does it mean for your mind? What does it mean in the way you live your life that you would say, well, I live it with such intent that it would be okay if I were to pass away maybe next week or so?
yeah. That's pretty much it. You pretty much just hit it on the head. It's like I wasn't ready to die because I thought that death was something that happens, like you said, when you're old and in your deathbed and you have all these health issues, and then it just happened to me and I had no control over it. So then I asked myself the question, and going back to one of the questions or something we were talking about earlier, it's like when this happened to me, I had to try and prepare myself for death at any moment, and I didn't know how else to attack that problem except for with what I knew as a baseball player. I understood how to prepare to face an opponent, and I understood how to prepare myself to compete on a field. So what I did was I just applied those same, I guess you could call them internal perspectives and approaches to life, and I applied that to the mission of becoming ready to die. So I approached it in a very practical manner of like, what if it were my last day? How would I ensure that I'm ready to die today? Because it very well could be. And for me to not believe that it could be would be very naive because of what happened to me and so many other near-death experiencers.
I really like that, and I don't know if that would apply to you, but I think for a lot of us, if and I'm just talking about myself here, but I know that you were a professional athlete, so perhaps we're a bit different here. But if I was to know, for instance, that maybe tomorrow I would die, or in a couple of days, then I would probably say, just leave everything as is. I don't care anymore, and I would probably just, I think, enjoy life. I would do the things that I enjoy. I would probably just go dancing and maybe eat out and do all the things that probably I would skip the gym, because why would I go there? Like things like that are not necessarily healthy. So when we apply this mindset of being ready to die, but we combine it with wanting to live a long and meaningful and healthy life, how would you balance this sort of hedonistic tendency of, it's only today, we only live today, and we need to milk everything we can out of it, and still be mindful of the goals and the plans and the hard work that needs to be doing every day?
Yeah, that's a good question. I've never been asked that question before. So there are two main components, in my opinion, to becoming ready to die. And the first one is in my opinion, again, and the way that I approach it. The first one is we have to do what we can to relinquish the fear of death. The second one is we can't leave anything on the table. So to that hedonistic tendency, what I believe leaving something on the table would be yes, fun and enjoyment and all of those things, but also love and forgiveness and compassion and surrender to whatever your higher power may be. And the way that I've approached it is that those things take work, they definitely take work and they take a commitment to a process. And like you said, over the long term is the way that I've written the book and have shared the mission, because if you were to die tomorrow, don't know I don't know what that's like. That's not the frame in which I've written the book. But to answer your question, as far as like how do you pair those things, I think I'm still trying to figure that out myself, how to enjoy life, but also dedicate myself to a higher calling that would ensure that I leave nothing on the table. And I think that might be different for each person, depending on the context of in which they're living.
Absolutely. I love that. And I think, leaving nothing on the table, I tend to be a very ambitious person. So I usually think of it in terms of, the output or the input, better said, that I can give, the energy, the time that I can put into something. But I've never thought of it in terms of love or forgiveness. I've never thought of it in terms of kindness. And if I were to think, well, could I be more loving today? Could I show up in a more loving way for the people around me? I do think that it would change a lot of my interactions and a lot of the actions that I take on a daily basis.
Yeah, definitely. And something else too, as part of my, I guess you could call it integration from my near death experience, from who I was to who I am, has just been this profound process of healing. And I think that's a part of it too, of not leaving anything on the table. It's like, I'll use an analogy. Like if I were going to face an opponent in a baseball game, I wouldn't want to face that opponent with an injury. And in that sense, maybe it would be an arm injury or a physical injury. But there's also this internal moral injury that I believe should, we may or we ought to strive to heal before we die. Because if we have this pain inside of ourselves that's unhealed or unprocessed, then it may be really challenging to leave nothing on the table.
Absolutely. And because we're talking about, these internal injuries, essentially, one of the things that you mentioned was during your NDE, you got to experience one of those times when your dad was disciplining you with a belt. And that was probably an experience that you were holding up against him, right? You weren't very happy that that was happening, obviously. And it felt mean from his side. It felt like something that he shouldn't have done, that somebody who loves you and cares for you wouldn't have done. But in your life review, you got to see the other side of that event, and the side of, not somebody that is taking pleasure in your pain and enjoying it, but somebody that wants, to make sure that you grow up right and that you have good values. And for better or worse, that was the best way he knew at the time to do so. How do you think we can process the trauma that we have been through in our early years with a new frame, as in your example?
That's a good question. I think, I don't know, I'm definitely no psychologist or trauma expert, but I think it's facing it first. I think for me, at least, I can only speak from my experience with it. I think, excuse me, in the process of healing from those things, I realized and I noticed that I just stuffed them down for a really long time and either pretended like they didn't exist or victimized myself that they happened to me, and I used that as part of my identity, almost as if it were some type of excuse to not face it, or I just masked it with some type of distraction and I just ran from it. And when I did allow myself to feel it, it was extremely painful and still is at times as I continue to heal from things that I may have gone through. But when it's faced, there's just this physiological release of whatever you were holding on to, or at least, like I said, in my own experience. And that is where the growth happens, I believe. I believe that unless it's faced, it can never be, we can never move on from it.
Absolutely. And I try to think of that often because I often hear from people that, have these internal injuries from childhood, and they say, well, my parents were so tough on me about getting good grades, or this happened to me and that's why I am this way, or this is why I do what I do. And even though I think a lot of times, of course, children of abuse or something like that, you're more than entitled to, hold that with you. But in the end, keeping it with you as an excuse is not doing you any favors in the long term. And it's just keeping you in that place where you are a victim and you had no better way to cope. So I think it's, as you say, so important that we face those things, and that I think a good exercise for everybody is to also try to think of the other side. So the other person at the end of this action, what would be the kindest and most loving intention or frame that I can give them so that I can make peace with that experience? And I think trying to do this exercise for those experiences that have maybe traumatized us is really helpful in helping us let go of it, regardless whether it's truthful or not, because maybe somebody did have ill intent when hurting us, of course, but we need to do what's best for us to be able to move on from those places.
Yeah, definitely. Right. And, like you said, there are very, very, very real victims out there where they were victims of abuse, where the abuser did have ill intent. And I'm not one of those people, so I don't know how they feel, but I can agree with what you said in that there's a quote. I mean, it's a very popular quote. It's hate in your heart consumes you too. And that is why that is the importance of healing from past traumas. It's not so much about giving the other person any type of gratification. It's all about letting ourselves go, letting the past version of ourselves that was hurt and may have been traumatized, letting that pain go and then moving into something that's newer and brighter and fresher and more fulfilling and joyous.
Absolutely. There's one thing you said at the beginning that really stuck with me and that I wanted to dive a bit deeper into, and that was living a life that wasn't mine. And I think a lot of us, what we'll do is we'll wake up one day when we're 40 or 50, and have a job that meh, we don't really like, be in a relationship that meh is not maybe the best, have kids that are a lot of work and we love them, but it's still a pain to get them ready every morning. And it almost feels like we're going through the motions, just, to keep up with mortgage payments, with, everything that we have going, and we forget why we do this or how we
Mm.
do this. And it very much seems that is, you wake up and you think, well, how is this my life? How have I ever wanted to be here? And of course, I also understand that you're quite young, at 25.
I
But
was
yeah,
19 when that happened.
yeah, yeah. But
Right.
I'm guessing now you're about 25.
Yeah, 24.
Yeah, there you go. So you're quite young for sort of understanding this midlife crisis, but
Right.
you do have really good insights. And how would you deal with, those feelings of waking up to a life that didn't feel like it was yours?
That's a heavy question for sure. And like you said, I cannot speak from the perspective of having children and having a career that I may not have, that I've spent, I don't know, years at that I don't like because I've just never experienced those things. But what I can say is life is too short for that. And it sounds cliche. It sounds cliche to live a life that may not be yours. And sometimes, like in my case, I didn't even know. I wasn't aware enough to know that the life that I was living wasn't what I wanted. For context, the reason I played baseball was because I got approval for it. I was good at it, and people will always tell me like, you should go pro, and you should do that, and you'd make your family proud. And what I did was I internalized those things, and I was like, okay, well then I'll just be a baseball player. And it wasn't until I got to know myself on a deeper level by working through all the traumas and getting to the core of who I actually am that I knew that that's not what I wanted. So for those people that may be living a life that doesn't feel right, like something's just off, I would definitely explore those feelings or those questions and continue to dive deeper. And then I believe that the answer is at the core. At the core of who we are, I believe that's where the answers lie. And for those people, I mean, is it going to be worth it if we live an entire life that we don't want and we only get one of them? It just doesn't, you know, it's much easier to make a hard decision and do something hard that's going to be worth it long term, that you're going to be proud of, versus something that you absolutely hate and then look back on your life and be like, I just wasted the entire thing.
Absolutely, and I think that's a really wise frame that we can use to evaluate our lives, whenever it feels like we're stuck, or it feels like it may what we have nowadays is maybe not what we would want to have.
Yeah, definitely.
So, Baba, was there anything that we didn't get to talk about, or anything that I haven't thought of asking you that you think our audience could benefit from hearing?
That's a good question. I would just say, just, I don't like to use the word advice because I don't think that, I don't know, I just don't believe in giving unsolicited advice. But I would just say, as a statement of service to whoever may need it, you're loved and you have a purpose, and it is your duty to live that purpose out. And it takes work and it takes sacrifice and it takes commitment. And it's not going to be very easy, but it's the path. It's the path. And the world needs what you have because you're the only person that can give that gift. That's all.
And it's so beautiful. And I cannot imagine that you're 24. I tend to talk as though I'm much older, as though I'm very old. Um, but yeah, you're so wise, and I think
Thank
that's
you.
such a beautiful message to end on.
Thank
So,
you.
for anybody that wants to hear more from you, where can they find you? And the book that you mentioned, when do you think it will be out?
So they can find me on YouTube and Instagram at the real Bubba Herrick. So Thereal, and then my name, Bubba Herrick. And as far as the book, it's in the final process of being written. And then it has to go through publishing and all of that jazz. But I would say by this time next year, it should be out.